In the last two videos, we have talked about how you can create methods with required and optional parameters. Then we have talked about various ways in which you can pass arguments when calling a defined method, and also overviewed the topic of method overloading. Now I know that all this technical stuff can be really boring, but I want to make sure that I tell you about all the major differences between these concepts so that you have strong fundamentals, which will stop you from making mistakes that will make you redo a huge part of your code. And maybe even if you make those mistakes in the future, because everyone's human, at least you would understand why your game is behaving the way it is if you understand these concepts. So beware, this is going to get a bit technical. Let's move forward and talk about the concept of passing arguments by value or by reference. Now, without going into too much detail, when you pass an argument by value, what you're doing is making a copy of the variable or value that you passed in as the argument. This is what we have been doing so far. While when you pass an argument by reference, instead of making a copy, you are pointing towards the memory location where the data of the passed argument is stored. Now, by default, any argument that you pass in the method call will be by value, even if the variable is a reference type. When you pass an argument by value, any operation that you do on the copy of the passed argument will not have any effect on the data inside the variable that you passed as the argument. They are two completely different set of data, so don't confuse that. Now, when you pass by reference, you only have a single copy of data that is being referenced by n number of variables. So, if a change is made to the single copy of data through any one of these variables, this change in data, like a domino effect, will be seen in all the variables. There is another concept in C#, and that is the concept of value types and reference types. Now, with the wording being so similar, that is the concept of passing by value or by reference, and the concept of value types and reference types, it is not weird that so many people start getting confused and start mixing these two completely different concepts with each other. So let me stop you from doing that before you even start. When you see any place that's talking about value types and reference types, what they are talking about are the main categories that the types in C# are divided into. While when you see any place that's talking about passing by value or passing by reference, they are talking about how the argument is being passed in a method call. There's a misconception that reference types, when used as arguments, are passed by reference by default, which is not true. As I've said before, everything that you pass in an argument by default is by value. We can go into more detail about value types and reference types and talk about how all that works, but I think that it will be relatively complex for beginners, so let's talk about that in another series. Now moving forward, in C# to pass an argument by reference, we can use the in, ref or out keyword. Now let's look at the three keywords one by one. When in keyword is used to pass an argument, this passed argument will be read-only, and you will not be able to modify its content inside the method's code block. To show this, let's declare a method named modifyEnemies and define an int parameter named number of enemies in it with the in keyword in front of it. Now let's try to modify this variable inside the method's code block like this. As you can see, we get an error as what we are trying to do is modify a read-only variable. Next, when you want to use the in keyword to pass an argument, the variable or value that is being passed as argument has to be declared and initialized before the method call. So let's initialize a variable named enemy count and set it to 10 and log its value like this. Unlike ref and out keyword, when using the in keyword, you can choose to not explicitly type the in keyword before the passed argument in the method call. But I would suggest that you don't do this, as explicitly typing the keyword will make your code much more readable and also make sure that you know what type of argument you are sending just by looking at the method call without having to go and look at the method definition. So now let's make the method call and pass enemy count variable using the in keyword. Now inside the method call, let's log the value of number of enemies like this. With this done, we'll be able to see if the argument is being passed correctly or not. Now let's go to Unity and check the logs. As you can see, both the logs show the same value, which means that everything is working correctly. Back to the code. Now let's move forward to the ref keyword. The ref keyword will let you read and modify the value of the argument that you passed by reference inside the method call. Just like the end keyword, the argument that is being passed needs to be declared and initialized before the method call. Unlike the in keyword, it is mandatory to explicitly type ref in both the places, that is, before the parameter in the method definition and also before the argument in the method call. So let's change the in keyword to ref like this. Also, let's suppose that the argument that you are passing, that is enemy count, is referencing memory location X of your memory. Now this memory location stores an integer value 10. So when we are using the ref keyword, if we make any changes to number of enemies, we won't see any errors like what we saw with the in keyword. And this change that we did will be done to memory location X, as the number of enemies parameter is referencing that memory location, just like enemy count variable that we passed in as the argument. So if we are passing by value instead, number of enemies variable and enemy count variable would not be referencing the same memory location, and there will be two copies of integer with value 10 in our memory at different memory locations, with each of these variables referencing one of these memory location. But by using the ref keyword, we are not making another copy, and both the variables are referencing the same memory location. Now let's modify number of enemies like this. When we modify the value of number of enemies in the method's code block, any other variable that is also referencing memory location X will also have their values changed, as all these values, including enemy count and number of enemies variables, are all referencing a single copy of data that is located at memory location X, and you just changed that single copy of data. Now let's write some debug.logs that will show you that we are truly referencing the same copy of data in both these variables like this. Now let's go to Unity and check the logs. As you can see, the first log in which we are logging enemy count's default value shows 10. Then the log inside the code block where we are logging number of enemies shows 10. Then the third log is after we have modified number of enemies and it shows 5. And then we have the fourth debug.log in which we are logging enemy count variable after the method call, and it is also showing 5. This clearly shows that both these variables are referencing the same memory location, because if they did not, then enemy count would still be 10 in the last debug.log. Now let's move forward to the out keyword. A normal method uses return keyword to send back a value of the defined return type to the line from which we called this method. But the limitation here is that you can only send back a single variable or value. The out keyword can be used when you want to return more than one value or variable from a method. What you need to know is that out keyword only allows you to set a value to the passed argument. Before setting the value to this passed argument inside the method's code block, you won't be able to read the data inside the passed argument. To show this, in the start method, let's change the ref keyword to out like this, where we are making the method call. And then inside the method definition, do the same. And as you can see here, if we try to do this, we get a compile time error in the first log, but we don't get this error in the second log because the second debug.log is done after setting the value for the output parameter, that is number of enemies. So let's remove the first log. Next, when we are using the out keyword, it is okay to not initialize the argument's value. So to test that, let's remove 10 from enemy count and remove the log below like this. And as you can see, we don't get any errors. So now what we have done is, we have declared enemy count variable, but we did not initialize it. Then we used it as the output parameter when calling the method. Now when the method's code block is executed, it will set the value to number of enemy out parameter. And as number of enemy is actually being passed a reference of enemy count variable that is not local to the method, the value inside enemy count variable will persist even after we leave the method. hence allowing us to return more than one value or variable if we declare more than one output parameter. With that done, another thing is that we need to assign values to all the out parameters before leaving the method, otherwise you will get a compile time error saying that output parameter x needs to be assigned before the control leaves the current method. Now let's go to Unity and check the logs. As you can see, both the logs show value of 5, which means that the out keyword is working as intended. Now there are some limitations on how you can use these three keywords. First is that you can't use them in async methods, which you define by using the async modifier. Second, you can't use them in iterator methods, which includes yield return or yield break statements. And third, there are some limitations regarding their use in extension method, but for now skip that, as extension method is not a beginner concept. Now I know that this would not make much sense right now, as I have not covered these topics, but I want to pass this information here so you at least know that these limitations do exist when it comes to these three keywords. With that, I think that I've covered everything that can be considered as beginner level in respect to methods, and we can finally move on to other topics from the next video. Well folks, that does it for today's video. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you like the content. Do comment below if you have any doubts or if you just want to share your thoughts. And as always, if you see someone struggling down in the comment section, do try and help them. Goodbye for now. This is your host VP signing off.